Hello, this is D.L. Hughes, and welcome to another Writer's Chalk Talk, Elmore Leonard's 10 plus 1 Rules for Writing. Lots of famous writers share their rules for writing, and Elmore Leonard's list is one of the most interesting, maybe because he was such an interesting writer. Leonard started writing Western novels, and several were made into movies. Most famous, perhaps, was Hombre, starring Paul Newman, and then 3:10 to Yuma, which was filmed twice, the first time in 1957 starring Glenn Ford and in 2007 starring Russell Crowe. He moved on to crime stories and wrote the novels that became the movies Get Shorty and Be Cool starring John Travolta. He also did Jackie Brown, which was directed by Quentin Tarantino, and the TV show Justified, among many, many others. Why did so many of his stories and novels become movies? Well, he created great characters, and he had a real gift for writing dialogue. His rules for writing are important. Rule number 1, Leonard said, never open a book with weather. The best-known opening for a mystery is, "It was a dark and stormy night." That's become a literary joke, the mark of an amateur writer. Actually, English novelist Edward Bulwer Lytton used it in 1830 to open a novel. It's been mocked since then. Leonard thought it was best to forget the weather because readers want to connect with characters. The faster you introduce people, the better. Rule 2, Leonard said, avoid prologues. He thought prologues were unnecessary for fiction writers. They are usually backstory, something that should be integrated nicely elsewhere in the novel. I remember when my friend, the late writer Michael Hemmingson, saved me from a fate worse than death. Mike was prolific, everything from pulp fiction to academic books about Gordon Lish, William T. Vollmann, and Raymond Carter. We read early drafts of each other's work, and I was among the first to see his fascinating work, Zona Norte. He read and offered feedback on my novel, Jet Pink. I had a prologue in Jet Pink, and Mike advised me to just cut it. That's funny, I wrote the prologue sitting in the Luxembourg Gardens in Paris, and it was filled with all the requisite literary flourishes. It was great, except for my ego. Mike saved me by urging me to cut it. Elmore Leonard had it right. Avoid prologues. Leonard said, never use a verb other than said to carry dialogue. If you read a lot of student writing like I do, you'll see that most students start out by using said, and they just can't leave well enough alone. Let's look at a light-hearted example. Lady Barrington looked at the engagement ring Reginald placed on her finger. "That's a small diamond," she said. But they don't trust the power of the word said, and they think they can improve upon it. Lady Barrington looked at the engagement ring Reginald placed on her finger. "That's a small diamond," she asseverated. Don't do that. You don't need variety. Stick with said. If you have a long, unbroken conversation, you can use he or she said in the beginning, and if the writing is good, you don't need to repeat said at every utterance. But said is the word you want to almost always use to give rhythm to your dialogue. Leonard said, never use an adverb to modify the verb said. This piggybacks on the previous rule. Many writers can't put force in the statement itself, and so they think they're giving their plain prose a turbocharge by putting an adverb rocket on the tail of the statement. Lady Barrington looked at the engagement ring Reginald placed on her finger. "That's a small diamond," she astonishingly asseverated. Bad. Purge as many adverbs as you can throughout your writing, but banish them all in dialogue. Leonard said, keep your exclamation points under control. In my writer mentoring, I see all kinds of writing. Let me tell you, there is a plague among new writers, and it's killing them. The plague is the use of the exclamation point. I recently edited a client book that had 1,273 exclamation points. I pared it down to 3. Now, those 3 could have been excised too, but I wanted to give the author the benefit of the doubt. Leonard put it this way. He said you are allowed no more than 2 or 3 per 100,000 words of prose. He was being both generous and humorous. Find words to express exclamatory thoughts and actions. Don't use exclamation points. Leonard said never use the words suddenly or all hell broke loose. I love this one. Adverbs and cliches are always a bad mix. You might write using such terms in your first draft, but you want to flesh out what you really meant in your second draft. In these examples, you want to find real words to express yourself, not fall back on empty terms like this. Rather than suddenly, you want to set the scene. Reginald walked down the dark alley. He heard a sound and saw the flash of a knife. He looked up and saw Lady Barrington standing over him with a vindictive smile on her face. As you can tell, this all happened suddenly, and we didn't use the adverb. All hell broke loose in the alley, but we didn't use that cliché. Avoid adverbs and clichés either separately or together. Leonard said, use regional dialect patois sparingly. Writing in dialect sometimes identifies and carries your character, but there is a twofold problem. First, you must have an ear for writing it. Most writers can't capture the Irish lilt, the Mexican Spanglish, or ghetto talk. If you can do it, great. But, as Leonard says, use it sparingly. The second aspect is that many readers don't like to read dialect. They have to recreate what you've written in their own minds, and they may not be good at dialect themselves. So, again, Leonard's rule is a good one. Use dialect sparingly. Leonard said, avoid detailed descriptions of characters. Now, this rule and the one that follows reinforces Leonard's cinematic approach to writing. He knows that readers will be projecting the story on the screen that's in their own minds. So he's saying that writers should give enough details to give shape to characters, but let readers fill in the details in the theater of their minds. He is saying something else too. That is, you don't dump all aspects of the character into a few paragraphs. You don't want to describe height, weight, clothing, features, and so forth all at one time. You let the physical and psychological details of a character leak out over time in the context of your story. Pace your descriptions. Don't dump them all at once on your readers. Leonard said, don't go into great detail describing places and things. He is repeating the same idea here, but in regard to places and things. Detail about places and things can be interesting, but don't do an information dump. Weave the details about places and things throughout your story. And finally, Leonard said, try to leave out the parts that readers tend to skip. That's probably the funniest and most oft repeated of his rules. If writers only had the psychic powers to be able to do this. But let me say it's possible. It only comes, however, with years of writing experience. This rule emphasizes why Leonard was such a successful writer, acclaimed by both the literary world and ordinary readers. That is, he was reader-centric. He was more concerned with the story that readers were seeing in their mind rather than just splashing words on a page. With that perspective, he was able to leave out the parts that readers tend to skip. Now, Elmore Leonard always claimed he had 10 rules, but it was 10 plus 1. He said the 11th rule summed up the other 10, but it really has a life of its own. He said, if it sounds like writing, I rewrite it. That is the genius of Leonard's writing. He was focused entirely on the mental images readers were creating in their minds, and he didn't want the writing to get in the way. Here's Leonard's full statement. He said, "If proper usage gets in the way, it may have to go. I can't allow what we learned in English composition to disrupt the sound and rhythm of the narrative." He explained that saying, "It's my attempt to remain invisible, not distract the reader from the story with obvious writing." In my view, that's the best advice you'll ever get about writing.